Hi. In this video, we're going to look at globalization in the context of public policy. In our previous discussions, we had to define public policy in the way we see it. Remember the definition by Thomas Dye, which says public policy is whatever government chooses to do or not to do. This inherently suggests that governments, if they decide to do something, that's implicit, that's the public policy that they are coming up with. Or if they do something or they don't do something, that inherently or implicitly suggests that by virtue of not doing it, that's their policy. That's one version of it. And there's the other one which suggests that public policy is a purposive course of action followed by an actor or a set of actors with a problem or a matter of concern. In this instance, what we're trying to get at essentially is that because this world is full of problems, because governments are faced with a whole lot of challenges and problems, so the set of actions or the set of activities that they put in place to remedy that problematic situation then becomes the public policy. So, and in the following, in this instance, we are now saying governments, by virtue of them being the actors that are responsible for the day-to-day welfare of, they provide political goods, they are in the process able to come up with issues or try to say in the context of say health issues, like say there's a cholera, with HIV epidemic, with inflation and all economic activities. Governments are now coming up and say, okay, with inflation, how do we deal with it? With cholera, with the cholera outbreak, how do we deal with the cholera outbreak? With say any other pandemics that are there, with HIV and AIDS. So if governments are going to say we have got the treat all campaign, we're going to provide ARVs to all citizens who are infected or afflicted, then that becomes a purposive course of action. In some instances, we are saying not everything that the government does with globalization is in this instance, we've defined globalization as reflecting the interconnectedness between and among states as they relate with each other. Let me bring hasten to say that globalization, by its nature, is a contested terrain. There is no agreement. Let me say that at the onset, that there is no agreement on what globalization is and what globalization entails. Essentially, it's what you see depends on where you are sitting. So in one instance, we have somebody who is sitting on the corner, and what they see of globalization is this aspect of globalization. And the other guys have said globalization can be seen as the social science mantra for the 1990s. It's something that seems to have magically taken over the whole world, the whole globe, and people are now trying to see how do they come to terms with this animal that would look like, that would call globalization. But also in the same breath, the interconnectedness has allowed countries to enjoy the benefits, also enjoy the risks that come along with this being interconnected. In some instances, people are now saying our borders are porous. By virtue of people being able to move across borders, that it means countries are no longer responsible for how people move in and out of their countries or how money is moved in and out of the countries. So it has created new environments, which essentially is a source of opportunities. You don't need to be stuck in one country if there are opportunities in the other country. Right now we talk of north-south collaborations, but also, like we're saying, it's also a source of risks. I'm sure, like I was saying, when we talk of the risks that are associated, say, with terrorism, the risks that are associated with money laundering. Previously, way back in the days, you had to go to the bank and apply for foreign currency if you are going to visit another country. You had to go and get your passports and everything else done. But in this day and age, you just go across the country with your debit card or with your Visa card. So the government no longer controls the money that you can take in and out of the country. So that on its own is a potential risk that comes in with. So now, coming back to public policies, to what extent are our governments, to what extent are our countries responsible for their purposive course of actions? To what extent can they be? Are they isolated? Are they policies that can be done in isolation of the global context within which you are operating? That's a pause and think. It's a pause for thought. So we're talking about globalization and the sources that it has brought, the sources of opportunities that it has brought, and also the opportunities that it has also brought with it, and the associated risks. We have said we also need to look at the policy decisions that governments take. They would also mobilize values, include others, exclude some actions as well. In this instance, we are saying, by virtue of public policies being a purposive course of action, there are some values that come along with this purposive course of action. It's not value-free. So in some instances, governments may decide to do, maybe in the case of HIV and AIDS, where they are saying, how do we deal with the issue of HIV and AIDS? Take, for example, the case of, say, in South Africa, with the former President Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki says, no, they don't agree on how to deal with HIV and AIDS. Some say you can eat beetroot. I think one of the former ministers said you can eat beetroot to get rid of HIV and AIDS. Thabo Mbeki says, no, HIV and AIDS does not kill. It's more of poverty. Let's address poverty issues. And others would say, no, what are the causes of HIV and how do we deal with it? So people bring in their values. I'm sure in some instances, if you take the theological approach where the Roman Catholic does not allow use of condoms. So if you are saying one of the key issues in dealing with HIV and AIDS is abstinence, is also treatment, is the ABCs, one of them condomize. But the Roman Catholic Church says, no, you don't need to condomize, because with providing condoms deliberately suggests that you are encouraging promiscuity. So it then becomes the value. So what we're saying is the policy decisions are not value-free. They are loaded with values. And in some instance, in the case of Botswana, we've been dealing with, should condoms be provided for in prison? And there's no agreement, because people are saying, listen, people are in prison for very specific offenses. But because they're in prison, providing them with condoms is deliberately acknowledging that there is same-sex activities happening in prison. So to provide or not to provide condoms, by its nature, then would require mobilizing values in terms of what we do or what we not do. So in some instances, it can then validate our position as a government or as policymakers to say, what should we do? To acknowledge or not to acknowledge then becomes back to our definition that we said, what governments decide to do or not to do. So that becomes the actions that validates, the activities that validate our actions. As we would also need to think through, globalization has by its nature brought a number of changes. When you look at it, like I said earlier on, we look at the end of sovereignty. Remember, when we talk about the state, remember from the Westphalian Treaty, way back in the days, where we're talking of territorial integrity, sovereignty of each country, and countries are able to do what they're supposed to do on their own, the principle of the legality of equality of states. All right, here we are. Now, the world has become a global village. To what extent can you claim your sovereignty? To what extent can you as a government, or to what extent can you as policymakers confine your activities to say, we are a sovereign state? Your sovereignty to some extent is tampered with. If you as a government, or if you as the policymakers were responsible for the distribution of foreign currency, how much is every person, every citizen allocated? But now, all of a sudden, everyone can move with their money on their cards and can use their cards as and when they see fit. Or people are now doing online shopping. To what extent can you suggest you are still in charge of your sovereignty? And to what extent can your actions independently be independent from everyone else? So in this instance, like we're talking of terrorism, to what extent can you be an island on your own? So we are saying globalization with it has brought with it the end of sovereignty. And also, we also need to talk of the reorientation to serve supra-territorial as well as territorial interests. You look at yourself and your country. To what extent can you say we as a country are committed to these activities? And beyond you, maybe let's talk of the foot and mouth disease. The foot and mouth or other diseases that have been going on. To what extent can you close your borders and say we're not going to deal with any other country because we don't have foot and mouth in our country, but others are coming? I'm sure you remember from the time when we had the flu virus and all the other viral diseases that have been going on. To what extent if you are a tourist destination and you still are attracting tourists, and yes, your own people have no diseases or they're as clean as you want to claim they are, but the extent that you are still inviting tourists and you are still being a tourist destination of choice, then to what extent are the supra-territorial or territorial interests coming into play? It also, globalization brings in a question of private sector welfare guarantees. To what extent, how do we, I think our local industries, the private sector, have also to match if they are to compete. We can no longer say we close our borders and now we can do our things on our own. We still have the private sectors from all over, the multinational corporations that are coming into play. They are increasing the competition. To what extent can we let our babysit our own private sector and say we can protect our private sector, yet we have opened ourselves? So we are saying with globalization, the interconnectedness also exposes us or exposes governments or policy makers to the vagaries of all what is happening in the outside. It also means the redefinition of warfare. Right now, yes, you are a peace-loving country. You don't get involved in fights and stuff. But if your neighbors, of your next neighboring country is having war, maybe take the case of Botswana, fairly democratic country, peace-loving, nothing. But the neighboring countries are on fire. There's this African proverb that says, when your neighbor's house is on fire, keep an eye on it, because the same fire can come to your house, to your homestead as well. So on that instance, we are saying the global war on terror. I'm sure when you think of the Americans, in the case of the boy George Bush, he says, "This, if you're not for us, it's against us. You're against us." That type of thinking assumes now that whatever is happening to the neighboring countries, the regions, also has a bearing to what happens within the international state, within the nation, within the specific country. We now also have these multilateral regulatory arrangements. Right now we have CITES, downlisting of elephants, the trading of elephants and hides. The decisions that are made on downlisting of elephants or the trade of ivory, yes, it is made at a very high level, at the international level, the Conference of Parties. But the decisions say, don't sell your ivory or don't sell your products, ivory, the ones in downlisting from this part 1 or part 2, has a bearing to how we as a country have to be. Maybe take the case of Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia. They have a lot of elephants, they have a lot of ivory trade. But because of the multilateral arrangements or regulatory arrangements they are party to, it also means they cannot divorce themselves from the downlisting or the use of elephant hide, the trade in ivory trade. So all you're saying is, because we now live in this global village, no longer this sovereign state of ours that we claim it to be, but whatever we do is guided by. We take the case of the gaseous exchange, the CP, the CFCs and stuff. The way things are done in the industrialized countries, or the way things are happening out there, the pollution that is happening there. Right now we're having floods. Botswana is a landlocked country, Zimbabwe is a landlocked country. They are having floods that have nothing to do with the rainfall patterns that is happening in Zimbabwe. But we are also being affected by the way other countries, or by the way what is happening to other countries. So all we're saying is multilateral regulatory arrangements, to the extent that we are party to as a specific country, have a bearing to the issues that we have to deal with. We talk of gender protocols, we talk of all these other arrangements that we become to. Maybe even the case of the ICC, in terms of should we, if somebody who is wanted at The Hague comes into our country, should we arrest him or not arrest him? I guess you can think of the case of South Africa with al-Bashir. South Africa is now on a tight shoe to say you should have arrested al-Bashir as soon as he landed on South African soil. So, to what extent can we say, oh, he's another African brother that is in our country, we cannot arrest him? And you are also bound by the ICC, the Rome Convention in terms of ICC. So those multilateral regulatory arrangements have a bearing. So in this instance, all we're saying is we need to think of the policies, the public policies that we bring out into the public domain, how they can then be taken in the context of globalization. And like we said, there's no agreement in terms of it's a contested terrain. And as far as we think and as far as we see it, we need to think through how our policies, domesticated policies, public policies, and how they will play out into the wider world, and how the wider world will receive and react and take us seriously or not seriously, as we would say it. Till we meet again, thank you. Bye.